Why is it that there's so many brilliant creative people out there, and yet many of these people struggle when it comes time to implement their creative idea or try to get audiences to take notice of their creativity? Well, in this video, we're going to be looking at several reasons why a lot of creative people, even though they're very talented and maybe their creative product is superior to others, why those creative people might be putting themselves at a disadvantage and why they might be feeling that other creative people, less talented maybe, are getting ahead of them. So in this video, we're going to talk about why that's the case and how you can make sure that your creative idea finds the proper audience and gets the respect and the impact that it deserves. So what's the difference between the struggling artist and the one that's successful? And what's the difference between the entrepreneur that has a lucrative career and the one that's struggling to pay the bills, even though these creative people that have great ideas, maybe they even have superior ideas to those that are having all of the success? Why is that the case? Well, let me give you a perspective, a way of looking at the creative process that might be different from what you are used to. So I'm going to start off by saying, okay, so here is, let's just say this is you right here. So the first way that most creative people mess up in their career is by starting with having just you in mind when you're creating your idea. You don't actually bring it out into the world. You really find this isolation and you crank out an idea, and maybe it's a pretty good idea, but since there is only you working in isolation, the problem is that there's really no feedback. You don't know whether you're getting closer or further away from something that an audience will love or your prospective customers will love. So the first problem is that a lot of creative people will begin and end here. So they'll finish their product and then they will try to market. So here you have your customers. So they begin here and they work in isolation, and when the product is finished, then they try to launch. Then they try to launch directly to their prospective customers. So this is an issue because there's no feedback here. We're not able to take into account the individual perspectives of our customers, of our audience. So the second way of looking at this is if you take into account both you and your customers while you are developing your creative idea. So this is in your creative process already. So you are working as an individual, but you're also periodically coming over and finding out what do customers want. Are they liking this the new improved idea, or am I getting further away from my target? So you're getting feedback, coming back, getting feedback, and you keep bouncing back and forth. So there's a line that goes through both of these here. So that in itself is good, but it does not actually guarantee you success, because even though your idea is getting much closer to what your audience is telling you, yes, this is what I want, even though your idea is getting much more effective, your idea may never even get the chance to be in front of a sizable audience, a sizable customer base. So how do you make sure that your idea actually is seen? Well, there's a third group that lies in between these two, and these are called the gatekeepers. So your customers, your gatekeepers, and you. So what is a gatekeeper? A gatekeeper is anybody that has the authority in your industry to decide which ideas are included and which ones are excluded from your industry or from your domain. So the easiest example here is your boss. If you work in a large corporation, then you have one or maybe several bosses, and in order to get your idea in front of customers in the first place, you first have to persuade the person that's the gatekeeper, your boss. So one way that ideas fail is the gatekeeper does not actually see the value of the idea. So maybe your customers love the idea right now, but your gatekeeper, your boss, does not see the benefit of it. So maybe the price of manufacturing would be too high to turn a profit. So your customers say, I love it, but then the gatekeeper says no. So that's one of the ways that you can have a product that satisfies everything you were after as an individual, also takes into account everything your customers want, and yet does not actually get in front of a prospective group of people in the first place because it gets bounced off by this gatekeeper. So other examples of gatekeepers, a museum curator would be a gatekeeper. There's only so many places that you can put art in a museum, and somebody has to decide which art is included and which is excluded. Another example, as a stand-up comedian, there is a stand-up comedy booker at each venue, and that booker's job is to determine who is allowed to go on stage that night. And he is working as a gatekeeper because maybe audiences love you, but he just does not see the value in including you on a big show. So you end up not being able to get past the gatekeeper. So maybe you can still perform sometimes, but you do not get the majority of work because the gatekeeper, the one that has the ability to give you that work, is not yet persuaded. So what creates massive success? It's the ability to get ideas through the gatekeeper while taking into account what your customers want. So the gatekeeper's job is to understand what creates success in the industry. So usually they are people that have already been successful. So these people understand what the customers want. And their job is to figure out if you or any of your peers, if their ideas should be turned back or if they should allow the idea to move forward. So the green line right here, this is where creative people find most of the success because they have the support of the gatekeeper. So because of that, they have a lot more opportunities than the people that are trying to move directly to the customers. And what's interesting here is that the quality of the ideas, the red line right here, this idea might be better, or even this idea might be better, the one that the gatekeeper turned down. But the green line, this is the person with all the opportunity, all the chance to be seen. So whether your idea is the best or not isn't important when we're talking about opportunities, because you first need the approval of the gatekeeper in your industry before the massive amount of opportunities are presented to you. So what's interesting here as well is that a lot of people, one of the counter arguments to this is like, okay, I understand that there is a person in my industry that has the ability to give me opportunities and that I would love his approval, but if I try that, then I'm going to be watering down my creativity. I'm not going to be authentic to who I am. And there's a very good point there. There's a lot of debate, but let me give you my perspective on it. So let's say that you're willing to say, okay, my first time in, I'm still kind of new to the industry. I'm not known by my customers yet. If you are willing to take a step back and say, all right, what does the gatekeeper want in order to give me the opportunity to get to my customers? If you're willing to take this into account and give it a high priority, then you get to be on the green line here, and you get to see this, maybe this initial area, this first tier of customers, the early adopters that are ready to jump at the idea. So these customers want to wait longer and make sure your idea is good. But these customers here, they're the early adopters. They want to jump right in. So you appeal to the gatekeeper, and then you get access to the first tier of your customer base. And what you can do here is you can get the success early on and then build trust with the gatekeeper, because you have proved yourself, you've proved that you're able to generate an idea, you're able to get it past the gatekeeper, and you're able to satisfy customers or your audience depending on what industry you're in. So what happens is you've built the trust here, and now the second time you come through this process, the second generation of your idea, you already have trust with the gatekeeper. So now the ideas that were turned down earlier, the ideas that are very unique, the ones that you're so passionate about because it's very authentic, those ideas are going to be able to get through the gatekeeper now, because you've built that trust earlier with the idea that you didn't really love in the first place. So by allowing yourself to take into account the gatekeeper and saying, yes, maybe I'm not 100% authentic in the first generation of my idea, but by building the trust, you're allowing yourself to take larger risks, to be more creative, more unique, be more further out there with your next idea because you've already built that trust. So my perspective on this is that this red line here, when you're talking about the long term, this creates more happiness than having us saying I'm very authentic to myself, and yet I'm not having the impact that I really want to have in my industry. So you may be feeling good about being authentic, and maybe you're loving your creativity, but this creates dissatisfaction here. How long can you go in an industry, even while you're being authentic to yourself, if you're failing to get the opportunities that you really want? It's pretty easy to see that can wear you down very quickly. So this is not the key to happiness. The key to being a happy, creative person is getting through the gatekeeper, satisfying those customers, and then using that leverage, that trust, to be more authentic in your next iteration of your idea. So this is the way that you can market your creativity much better. I mean, you can see how, even regardless of how well you work on how much you work on your creative idea here, the opportunities that you have, the ability to market your creative product is going to depend a lot on the gatekeepers in your industry. All right, let's talk briefly about why gatekeepers exist in the first place. So gatekeepers, their primary job, as we said, is to decide what gets included in your industry and what is excluded. Gatekeepers their job is really about quality management. They're trying to make sure that their industry stays at a very high level. So if they start admitting everybody they start launching every idea, then the image of the industry or the business is going to suffer. So their job is quality management. And you can see how important a gatekeeper is to an industry by looking at industries that have no gatekeepers, or the gatekeepers are so lax that they're basically might as well not even be there in the first place. And one good example of that is the ebook industry. There are practically no gatekeepers in order to launch an ebook. So all you need to do is basically have a couple of pages of an ebook. You need to format it correctly, and then you can just start selling it on Amazon. So there's basically no gatekeepers here. So every idea that an individual has, they can just jump directly to the customers. And what ends up happening is that there's this flood of new ebooks, but at the same time, the quality of those ebooks are suffering because there's no gatekeeper to pick out the ones that are high quality and the ones that aren't. So just look at the publishing industry. There is a very strong gatekeeper in the print industry where you're trying to get a national publisher. If that's the case, if you want a bestseller, then it's going to be very difficult because publishers, they know what works, and they're going to vet every book that comes their way, every manuscript, to make sure that, yes, it will appeal to customers. So they will get thousands and thousands of manuscripts, but they'll only choose a handful of them because those are the highest quality. And what ends up happening is that the book industry is still high quality. If you want a good book, then you can go to any bookseller and you can know that there's some trust there because they're already a best-selling author or they have the credentials. But you trust that printed book that is from a publisher that is well known far more than you would trust any ebook that you find on Amazon.com. So the gatekeeper is very important to the overall quality of an industry and the image of individual businesses as well. So what's the takeaway here? Is that persuasion is an instrumental part of the creative process. Earlier we said some individuals are generating their idea, and then the idea is finished, and then they try to market to customers. What happens here is that the idea is done, and now you're trying to persuade customers without ever getting feedback from them. So maybe your idea is not really syncing with them very well. So that kills your persuasion, because the customer says, okay, so I think that, A, B, and C is important, and your customer thinks that A, P, and Q are important. So your ability to persuade your customers to market to them is diminished, because A is the only factor that they end up caring about. So you need the customer's input in order to market to them effectively. But also, your gatekeepers are important, because without them, your ability to get to the massive audiences, the massive customers, is greatly diminished without their help. So we said earlier, publishers. A publisher he's a gatekeeper that has the ability to get you into bookstores around the country, around the world. So they are able to get you to the massive customers. Without them, you are taking this like little sliver here. So your ability to market to gatekeepers is important. So maybe gatekeepers want P, Q, and B or so. So your ability to market to them is determined by your ability to satisfy both the gatekeeper and the customers. Without acknowledging both of those groups, or I guess I should say all three of the groups, then your ability to market your creative idea is greatly diminished.